Behind the most famous spiritual awakening in history, there was a woman whose story nobody talks about. You're living your dream life. Royal palace, handsome prince husband, beautiful baby boy. You have everything a person could want in ancient India. Then one morning, you wake up, and he's gone. Not gone to work, not gone on a trip, vanished into thin air. Your baby is crying in the next room, your servants are whispering, and you have absolutely zero idea if your husband is dead, captured, or if he decided you weren't worth sticking around for. Depending on which tradition you follow, 6 years pass. Some sources say up to 15. Before this man shows up at your door, he's not your missing husband anymore. He's become the Buddha, the enlightened one. The guy everyone's calling the greatest teacher who ever lived. You're still the wife he left behind. That's not even close to the real story. The woman who was abandoned actually became one of the most revolutionary spiritual leaders of her time. She didn't survive being left. She used that pain to transform herself into something extraordinary. Today, we're exploring the story they don't teach you. The story of Lياسودارا, the Buddha's wife, the woman who turned heartbreak into enlightenment and changed the face of spirituality forever. By the end of this video, you'll never think about the Buddha's journey the same way again. Ancient India, 500 BCE, in the region where India and Nepal meet today. This story starts way before either of them were born. According to the Jataka tales, these two souls were connected across lifetimes. In one past life, Lياسودارا was a devoted wife who prayed for her husband's spiritual success. In another, they were both seeking the path to enlightenment together. Some Buddhist traditions say their meeting wasn't coincidence. Destiny orchestrated their union. Lياسودارا wasn't your typical princess sitting around waiting to be rescued. Born into the Shakya clan, the same royal family as Siddhartha, she was brilliant, sharp, the kind of woman who could hold her own in political discussions and philosophical debates. The Lalita Sutra describes their wedding as a grand affair, but most people miss this detail. Before Siddhartha could marry her, he had to prove himself in competitions against other suitors. Archery, sword fighting, intellectual contests. And Lياسودارا? She wasn't a prize to be won. She was choosing her partner too. When they finally married, palace life seemed perfect. Gold everywhere, servants attending to every need. 3 palaces for different seasons because, why not? Their son Rahula was born, and for a moment, everything looked like a fairy tale ending. But Lياسودارا was paying attention. She noticed things. Late night walks where Siddhartha would stare at the stars for hours. Deep silences during meals. Questions about suffering that came out of nowhere. The restlessness growing in his eyes. She was intelligent enough to sense something was building, but nobody, not even someone as perceptive as Lياسودارا, could have predicted what was coming next. The night it happened, Lياسودارا was sleeping peacefully next to her husband and baby son. According to the Mahavastu, one of the earliest Buddhist texts, Siddhartha looked at his sleeping family one last time. Some versions say he almost woke her. Others claim he kissed their foreheads goodbye. But in the end, he chose silence. He took his horse Kanthaka, his charioteer Channa, and disappeared into the darkness. Morning came. Lياسودárا reached across the bed, empty. She called for him. Silence. She ran through the palace, asking servants, guards, anyone. Nobody had answers. Then the terrible truth hit her. Her husband, the father of her child, the future king, had vanished without a word. Feel that for a second, the confusion, the panic, the embarrassment. But this is where Lياسودárā's strength shows up. While other women might have collapsed, she got angry, really angry. He hadn't left for war or duty or another woman. He'd abandoned his son, his people, everything they'd built together. Without explanation, without purpose anyone could understand. The palace buzzed with whispers. Neighboring kingdoms whispered. Captured, mad, or simply weak. And Liyasodara, she was left holding baby Rahula, facing the judgment of an entire society that blamed wives when husbands disappeared. Ancient India wasn't kind to single mothers, especially royal ones whose husbands had vanished. Instead of hiding in shame, Liyasodara held her head high and raised Rahula alone. Years passed. No letters, no messages, no confirmation he was even alive. The woman who once had everything now had to rebuild her entire world from scratch. Three years in, 4 years, 5 years. Liyasodara had almost given up hope of ever seeing her husband again. Then the stories started trickling in. Merchants traveling through the kingdom brought strange tales. A wandering teacher somewhere near Bodh Gaya. A man who spoke about suffering and liberation. Someone who looked familiar. At first, Liyasodara dismissed these rumors. Dozens of spiritual teachers roamed India. Holy men were everywhere. Why would this one be different? But something inside her had changed during those years of abandonment. The luxury of palace life, the gold, the servants, the endless ceremonies. They all felt hollow now. Empty. She started visiting temples, not for show or royal duty, but searching for something real, something that could explain why her perfect life had crumbled. Then one day, a traveling monk arrived at the palace gates. He spoke about a teacher called the Buddha, the awakened one. This teacher had discovered the root of all suffering. He could explain why people hurt, why nothing lasts forever, why attachment brings pain. The monk described this Buddha's background. Royal family, left his palace, abandoned his wife and child to seek truth. When the monk mentioned the teacher's background, a prince from the Shakya clan named Siddhartha Gautama, who had left his family, Liyasodara's blood went cold. The room started spinning. Her missing husband, the man who'd left her without explanation, had become the most famous spiritual teacher in India. Relief flooded through her first. He was alive. Then came anger. Then confusion. Then something she hadn't expected. Curiosity. Vinaya Pitaka tells us that 6 years after his enlightenment, Buddha decided to return to his homeland. Liyasodara heard the news before anyone else. Servants whispered about royal preparations. The king was organizing a massive welcome for the enlightened prince. The entire kingdom buzzed with excitement. Everyone except Liyasodara. She made a decision that shocked the court. While every other royal family member rushed to greet Buddha at the city gates, she stayed in the palace. She wasn't going to run to him like nothing had happened. If he wanted to see her, he could come to her. Hours passed, finally. Footsteps approached her chamber. The man who entered looked like Siddhartha, but different. Calmer, more present. His eyes held a depth that hadn't been there before. He wore simple robes instead of royal silk. The ancient texts skip the personal details, but we can imagine the weight of that moment. Years of separation. Two people who had become completely different. He had found enlightenment through leaving everything behind. She had found strength by staying and rebuilding. Both had transformed, but through opposite paths. Perhaps few words were needed, just the recognition of who they'd each become. He'd found enlightenment through renunciation. She'd found strength through endurance. But the reunion wasn't complete without one more person. Their son, Rahula, now 7 years old, met his father for the first time since infancy. That meeting, that's a whole other story we'll save for another video. The real shock came next. After their private conversation, Liyasodara made an announcement that stunned everyone. She wanted to join the Sangha, the community of Buddhist practitioners. Not to follow her husband, to follow her own path to enlightenment. This is where Liyasodara's story gets revolutionary, and where most history books conveniently skip the details. At first, Buddha refused her request, not because he doubted her spiritual capacity, but because the Sangha only included men. No women allowed. That was the rule. But Yasodara wasn't the type to accept no quietly. She teamed up with Mahapajapati Gautami, Buddha's stepmother, and a group of other royal women. Together, they approached Buddha again. And again, he said no. So they did something unprecedented. They shaved their heads, put on yellow robes, and showed up at the monastery anyway. Picture the scene: a group of women, former princesses and queens, standing at the gates of an all-male religious community, demanding equal access to spiritual training. This wasn't 2024, this was 500 BCE. Women challenging religious authority? Unheard of. Finally, after pressure from his cousin Ananda, Buddha relented. He established the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of Buddhist nuns. Yasodara became one of the first women ever ordained in Buddhist tradition. But she didn't stop there. The Therigatha, a collection of verses by early Buddhist nuns, includes Yasodhara's own words. Listen to this.
I have cut off my hair. I have put on the yellow robe. I live by alms. Having been a woman of great beauty, now I am free from attachment.
She wasn't celebrating becoming a nun because she wanted to be near her former husband. She was celebrating her freedom from everything that had once defined her. Beauty, marriage, status, royal privilege. Yasodhara developed her own teaching style, her own insights, her own followers. She became known for helping other women understand that spiritual awakening didn't require suffering in silence. She taught that pain, abandonment, betrayal, these weren't obstacles to enlightenment. They were gateways to understanding the temporary nature of all relationships, all circumstances, all identities. Some traditions state that Yasodhara attained arahantship. Some even say she reached the same state of liberation as the Buddha himself, complete enlightenment. The woman who was once defined as Buddha's wife had become something much more powerful. Yasodhara, the enlightened. So why don't we know more about Yasodhara's story? Why isn't she mentioned in every Buddhism class alongside the Buddha himself? The reality? Brutal. Early Buddhist texts were preserved through oral tradition, passed down by monks, recorded by male scholars, and interpreted through centuries of male-dominated religious institutions. Male scholars simplified women's stories, minimized them, sometimes erased them entirely. The official narrative became, Buddha left his wife and child to seek enlightenment. End of story. Her pain became a footnote. Her spiritual achievements became secondary details. Even when texts mention Yasodhara, they focus on her role as the abandoned wife, rather than her accomplishments as the pioneering spiritual teacher. This pattern repeats throughout religious history. How many female disciples vanished from Christianity? How many women mystics disappeared from Islamic texts? How many Hindu female sages were forgotten? Recent scholarship has started recovering these lost voices. Buddhist feminists and historians are digging deeper into the Therigatha, analyzing archaeological evidence, and questioning traditional interpretations. They're discovering that early Buddhism had far more female leadership than we've been taught. Women didn't follow men into spiritual life. They created their own paths. They developed their own practices. They achieved their own enlightenment. Yasodhara wasn't unique because she was Buddha's wife. She was unique because she transformed personal suffering into universal wisdom. She broke gender barriers that had stood for millennia. She proved that enlightenment doesn't require abandoning responsibility. It requires transforming how you carry it. But her story raises a haunting question. How many other Yasodharas existed throughout history? How many women turned their pain into power, their abandonment into awakening, their silence into strength, and had their stories buried because they didn't fit the narrative men wanted to tell? Buddhism teaches that all beings have Buddha nature, that everyone can achieve enlightenment, that gender, status, background, none of these matter on the spiritual path. Yasodhara proved this teaching true. She didn't need anyone's permission to become enlightened. She didn't need her husband's guidance to find truth. She needed exactly what she had: intelligence, determination, and the courage to transform suffering into wisdom. So we've reached the end of a story that's really a beginning. Liyasodara's journey teaches us something profound about resilience, about transformation, about refusing to let other people's choices define your worth. She didn't wait for rescue. She didn't spend decades bitter about abandonment. She didn't define herself through someone else's spiritual journey. Instead, she took the worst moment of her life and used it as raw material for enlightenment. Think about that. The pain of being left behind became her gateway to understanding impermanence. The shame of public abandonment became her teacher about the illusion of social status. The challenge of single motherhood became her training in compassion and strength. Modern psychology calls this post-traumatic growth. Buddhism calls it the transformation of suffering into wisdom. Liyasodara calls it Tuesday. Her story matters because it shows us a different model of spiritual awakening. Not the dramatic renunciation of everything, but the patient transformation of everything. Not escape from responsibility, but the enlightened embrace of it. She became a teacher, a leader, a pioneer, and a mother. She proved that spiritual development doesn't require choosing between personal growth and caring for others. The woman history tried to forget, the voice patriarchy tried to silence. The story traditional Buddhism tried to minimize turns out to be one of the most powerful examples of enlightenment we have. Today, as we struggle with our own disappointments, our own betrayals, our own moments of being left behind, Liyasodara's life whispers across 2,500 years. Your abandonment is not your ending. Your suffering is not your identity. Your pain is not your prison. These are your teachers, if you're brave enough to learn from them. Maybe the real question isn't, what would Buddhism look like if we heard more women's voices? Maybe the real question is, what would your life look like if you stopped waiting for someone else to give you permission to transform? 25 centuries later, when life abandons you in the darkness, remember, somewhere in ancient India, a woman woke up alone and chose to become extraordinary. Speaking of transformation, Liyasodara's son Rahula has his own incredible story of meeting his father for the first time and becoming the youngest monk in Buddhist history. That video is coming soon, so hit that notification bell because, trust me, you don't want to miss that family reunion. What did you think about Liyasodara's story? Drop a comment below and let me know which part hit you the hardest. And if this changed how you think about Buddhism, share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of turning pain into wisdom. Until next time, stay curious, stay wise, and remember, your story isn't over, it's still being written.